As the options continue to dwindle, a final ultimatum is given, pushing the battle for Atlas into the endgame, and possibly setting the entire kingdom's fate in stone. With that being said, I will say spoiler warnings for those who have not seen episode 10 of RWBY Volume 8 just yet. I won't be showing the episode or any clips from it in this video, simply images of the episode and analyzing the events that take place. I will leave a link in the description below so you guys can go to Rooster Teeth first, watch the episode there, and support the series that we all love. Now, the episode itself begins back with Ironwood, who's none too happy at the moment, not only having to deal with everything that's already happened, but also because of an update a couple of his soldiers have brought him. There has been a prison break. Cinderfall has successfully been able to take Arthur Watts away from the military compound. And on top of that, Robin Hill and Crow Bronwyn have also made their escape. But on the bright side, they still have Jacques Schnee in custody, which literally no one cares about. Ironwood completely disregarded that information, and obviously Robin and Crow didn't care enough to break him out either, which is rightly deserved given everything that Jacques has done up until now. But what's notable about this conversation is the fear that Ironwood's soldiers are exhibiting. They seem absolutely terrified to bring this information to him. Obviously, because they don't want to bring more bad news to someone who's already having to command an army while the kingdom is under attack, but I think it's also stemming from them realizing how unhinged Ironwood is becoming, and bringing him more bad news, they're maybe fearing for their own safety on top of this. So that kind of, in my mind at least, doesn't bode well for the military actually following Ironwood's orders going forward, especially after this episode, given everything that happens, but we'll have to see how things progress. Ironwood then orders both of those soldiers to not return to his office unless they have Robin and Crow in custody, who presumably are still within the building, which kind of says to me that Ironwood's sending all of his soldiers away, meaning that he'll be alone in his office, ripe for Crow to come and confront him, and possibly kill him in the process. So that confrontation probably going to happen next episode or the episode following, but again, we'll have to wait and see. After Ironwood dismisses the soldiers, though, he turns back to the battlefield and he sees a light as Monstro explodes. And this is probably why we got the photosensitivity warning at the beginning of the episode, but Monstro explodes in a massive flash of light that is seen all throughout Atlas. Everyone in the Schnee Manor is able to see it, and especially those who got a front row seat, namely the Aesops, as they were about to deliver the bomb that Ironwood had gave them for that exact purpose. But before they can deliver it, Monstro explodes in front of them, knocking them all backwards. But now, Monstro has successfully been killed, and as the dust settles and the ashes of Monstro begin to fall, we see a shadowy figure skip through the battlefield, carrying with them the Relic of Knowledge. So, Neo, who presumably was on Monstro when it exploded, survived unscathed, and has successfully escaped with the relic. As we cut back to the Aesops, we see that they're relatively unharmed as well, though Marrow is very worried about Yang, Ren, and Jean, because as far as he knew, they were on the whale when it went up, and could now be dead. But he isn't given much time to worry about that, as Winter gets new orders from Ironwood for all of them to return to his office. It's also notable that Elm seemed kind of concerned about Yang, Ren, and Jean as well. As Vine went up to try to comfort her or put a hand on her shoulder, she brushed him off. So if that's the case, then perhaps it'll be Elm and Marrow who defect from Ironwood's military and join Team RWBY's side at some point in the future. But in the meantime, everyone packs up the bomb and heads back to Ironwood. And then we cut to two others who are watching the explosion. Cinderfall and Arthur Watts stand atop a building in Atlas, apparently unable to contact anyone from inside. Salem still has to, rebuild herself after that explosion. Hazel defected, Emerald defected, Neo defected, so there's really no one who they would be able to contact at this point. Watts wants to come up with a game plan in the meantime, but Cinder continues to only be focused on herself, wanting to get to Penny and take the Winter Maiden powers. So Watts corrects her on a little misunderstanding she seems to have. He can't actually control Penny at will. Rather, he just uploaded a virus to her systems that would cause her to go to the vault, open it, and then end her own life. Which, of course, upsets Cinder greatly. How would she ever obtain the Winter Maiden powers if Penny is dead before she can get to her? Well, she won't. And Watts promptly informs Cinder that he doesn't work for her, he works for Salem. So Cinder then comes up with a brilliant new plan. She's going to drop Watts off the building and then go wait at the vault for Penny to arrive, where she will tear her limb from limb and take the maiden powers. And hearing this, Watts, instead of continuing to cling to Cinder's arm, making sure that she doesn't drop him, he starts laughing at her, saying that, right, this has worked so well for you in the past. You went to go confront Freya, and that failed miserably, and Penny even became the Winter Maiden. You then deviated from Salem's plan at Haven Academy, and when you went to try to take the powers from Raven Bronwyn, that failed miserably for you as well. If only someone had warned you about that beforehand. Oh right, I did, and you didn't listen, when literally all you had to do was follow the plan that was set out, but you couldn't do that. She's just a selfish little girl, and up until now, all she's been is just a headache. She has to be more than strong, she has to be smart, but she can't seem to comprehend that. And while Watts is saying this, Cinder is getting increasingly angry and upset. The powers are starting to swirl around her, but eventually they seem to sink in. She pulls Watts back to the building and throws him on the ground. Then she walks over to another edge of the building, sits down, and sheds a tear. Now, really, I don't have much sympathy for Cinder at this point. Learning what she's went through in her backstory, it was horrible, and I completely understand her lashing out against her abusers, but once it gets to this point and how much damage and destruction she's caused in her own selfish desire for power, I really have no sympathy for her. But now that she might be starting to listen to others' opinions, it seems to be a bit of a change in perspective. And I'm curious to see if Cinder will start to turn over a bit of a new leaf, maybe starting to care a bit about those around her and listen to someone else's opinions instead of solely focused on her own desires, but we'll see how that all plays out. We then cut to ground zero of the whale explosion, where we see Jean, Yang, Ren, and Oscar. Oscar is pretty much unscathed from being right there at the explosion, likely protected by magic, but I'm kind of curious how Jean, Ren, and Yang are okay, because they didn't seem to really get that far from the whale when the explosion went off. But still, they seem relatively alright. They likely still all had their aura, so that probably protected them to some degree, but that was a pretty massive explosion. Yang then gets a call from Blake, and she's able to tell her that they are all okay. And Weiss gives them all directions to get to the subway below Atlas and eventually get to the Schnee Manor. We also see that Emerald is quite upset about Hazel being killed, because presumably, with him being right at ground zero, where all of that magic was directed at Salem, who Hazel was holding at the time, he is probably dead. But we don't actually see the body, and therefore we can't say for sure, because Salem was technically between him and the blast, so he could have used her body as a shield, and if Jean, Ren, and Yang are alive from this explosion and relatively unharmed, then it's possible that he could be too. Though I think as part of his semblance, his numbing agent, and injecting all of that dust in his body, he may not actually have his aura cloak active, so I don't really know if he will be able to survive, or at least without serious injury and be on the brink of death. Not that he wasn't beforehand, but still, I don't think it's a guarantee that Hazel was killed by this explosion, at least until we see otherwise. In the subway, Oscar, Ren, Yang, Jean, and Emerald are heading to the Schnee Manor. They've decided to bring Emerald with them, and Jean and Yang don't want to forgive her. They are pretty much holding her hostage at this point. Yang has her weapons, and Jean has his sword drawn towards her, so yeah, they're not really ready to forgive her. But Oscar and Ren seem to want to give her a second chance. Ren can see her emotions, and she has purple petals surrounding her. I'm guessing that's remorse, considering the topic that they were discussing was everything that happened at the fall of Beacon, Yang losing her arm and how Emerald is partly responsible for that, and Oscar is arguing that, you know, you don't have to forgive her, but maybe give her a second chance. We've already accepted help from someone today that we don't necessarily trust, and this is when Ren points out that Ozpin has returned, that he kind of had a feeling that he had. I wonder if with his semblance, and when he looks at Oscar and the emotions that are coming from him, if he can see two people's emotions, both Oscar's and Ozpin's. And I wonder how those petals would look as their souls continue to fuse together. If Ren is going to be the one to first notice that Oscar and Ozpin have merged together. That could be a way that this is progressing, and I'm curious to see if it plays out that way. Of course, Yang and Jean are a bit surprised at hearing this, but Oscar tells them all that Ozpin entrusted him with his cane, the long memory, and all of the power that had been stored within it. That the cane stored kinetic energy from his many lifetimes, and that he used a lot of it to destroy the whale just now. It's been a long time coming to finally learn what the long memory is capable of. In the Volume 3 DVD commentary, we were told that its abilities all revolve around storing time. And now we finally know that it can store kinetic energy over hundreds of years to be used later on. So when Oscar was falling from Atlas at the end of Volume 7, he was able to tap into that power, and that's what allowed him to break through the bottom of Atlas. And then I guess it was just his regular magic that he used to create that sphere and allow him to survive the fall itself. So I'm curious to see if the long memory has any other capabilities, and what other things Oscar can do with his magic. It is notable that some of the power still remains within the long memory. And based on how Emerald was kind of looking at him when he was saying that, I feel like Emerald might try to take that at some point in the future. And we'll see if she ends up becoming an ally or not. After this, they hear a baby cry from further down the subway, and as they all run around the corner, they see a massive group of people from Atlas. All of the civilians in Atlas have taken shelter in the subway, and as they walk through the crowd, Emerald seems to be showing regret for her actions. She supported Salem and kinda sorta shares in the responsibility for what happened to these people. But Oscar then turns to Emerald and says, regardless of how any of this turns out, I've seen what you can do, Emerald, and we could really use someone like you on our side. So there is hope that Emerald might end up joining up with Yang, Jean, Ren, Oscar, and all of Team RWBY's faction, which I am all for that happening. However, I think Emerald kinda does want to break off on her own and maybe just be done with all of it, go to Vacuo and find Mercury on her own and just try to, get away from everything. So I think she'll try to break away from Team RWBY's group at least once more before the volume ends, but perhaps she will end up joining and going to Vacuo along with them for Volume 9 or something along those lines. And I feel like she might try to take Oscar's cane in the process, but we'll have to see how things turn out. We then cut back to Ironwood's office as he's looking over the remaining troops of the Atlas military. We see that the battalions and the fleets are about 50% wiped out, which, given everything that's happened up until now, isn't too bad, I guess. A lot of lives have been lost, but they still seem to have a fighting chance, especially now that Monstro has been destroyed. I'm curious to see how many Grimm were destroyed along with Monstro, because we saw from the shockwave of the explosion that the Grimm flying throughout the city were presumably wiped out as well, or at least took some damage, but I would think that many of the buildings would be knocked over if the explosion was that strong, and people who were really close to the epicenter of the explosion, the Aesops, Jean, Yang, Ren, would have had more damage to them if it was that strong. So I'm curious to see how much remains after that explosion, and if Monstro being destroyed means that there's just going to be Grimm liquid pretty much oozing all over the battlefield, spawning more Grimm than the remaining army can actually deal with. But that'll be for a later time, because right now the Aesops have come to give Ironwood their update. That they weren't actually the ones who blew up Monstro, that they still have the bomb and brought it back with them, which Ironwood says might be useful in the future. Ironwood then tells them all that, well, Penny hasn't come to the vault yet, so Watts is pretty much useless, and we'll never find out what reason that is because he kind of escaped thanks to Cinder Fall. And also, Crow and Robin are gone too, which Harriet is very upset about, but Ironwood stops her from leaving. Ironwood then says that they need to get the Winter Maiden. That is the only way Atlas has any chance of surviving. And he's getting more and more frantic as his focus is continuously on getting the Winter Maiden and getting the relic from the vault. That is all he's focused on, and that is all he cares about at this moment, which I think is a direct result of his semblance, Metal, hardening his focus on this one goal. I think that his semblance has been driven pretty far in overdrive by this point, and I'm curious to see if Crow shows up and knocks some sense into him, breaks his aura, and deactivates his semblance, if he'll realize that, oh crap, I've maybe made a couple bad decisions throughout this entire thing. Or Crow will just straight up kill him and it'll be all over and done with. Anyways, he turns to Winter and says to bring him Jean, Ren, and Yang. And when Winter asks why, he says, well, I should have thought of this sooner. I had Crow in custody, but didn't do so. But now that we have these three, I'm going to leverage Penny's friends against her, threaten to take their lives if she doesn't do what I want. Harriet then cuts in and says, well, about that, sir, Winter actually released them all. They went to the whale and never returned, so sorry, that's not going to work. So now Ironwood is extremely pissed at Winter. He walks over to his little table that he's using as pretty much the command center and smashes it. Probably not very helpful for controlling the military, but Ironwood's just giving in to his rage and all of his emotions at this point. Given the amount of pressure that he's under, I can understand that to some extent, but the decisions being made, not really that great, because he then gets a call from someone else in the military telling him that there's a bunch of non-military ships headed towards Mantle, and as he looks at his screen, he sees that they're Schnee Dust Company freighters, and realizes that Weiss is responsible, much to Winter's surprise, but Ironwood then comes up with a plan. Realizing that it's always been about Mantle. They've always wanted to save the people of Mantle, and now he can use that to his advantage. And then we see Cinder for one final time this episode, who gets a message from Neo. Your boss may not stay dead, but you certainly will without this. And she shows Cinder a picture of her holding the Relic of Knowledge, and then gives Cinder a bit of an ultimatum. If you want her name, you know what you owe me. So, unfortunately, Neo is still focused on getting revenge for RWBY instead of maybe trying to find out the truth for herself from the Relic of Knowledge. I still think that it might turn out that way, that a confrontation between RWBY, Cinder, and Neo being there is going to happen, and then RWBY will tell Neo, I didn't kill Roman. If you want to know what happened that night, why not ask Jin? And I think it might play out that way, that Neo will be able to ask her question, we'll get the truth revealed of what happened to Roman that night, and I think that would make the most sense for that question from the Relic of Knowledge, because Cinder really doesn't have a question for the Relic. I don't really think RWBY and that group would have any very significant question to ask of the Relic of Knowledge. Of course, there's more things that they could find out, but they already asked the very open-ended question of what is Ozpin hiding from us, so presumably they know the entire truth now. Not really anything else that they need to know, and the only other person who would need to ask a question would of course be Salem. So I have a feeling that that last question might be used by Neo or by RWBY asking Jin on Neo's behalf what happened at the night of Beacon. Just to get her off of RWBY's back, not trying to kill her. One less person to worry about, regardless of what information is actually shown to Neo at that point. Still, I love seeing Neo sass Cinder like this, and I hope we get more of Neo's attitude in the next couple episodes, because it's fantastic. We then cut back to the Schnee Manor, where everyone is finally reunited with one another. And I say finally, even though it's been like 36 hours or so, I'm gonna guess, since they actually parted ways, because all of Volume 8 only takes place over the course of 2 days, so they haven't been separated that long, but a lot of stuff has happened, so probably feels like quite a while. We see the touching reunions of everyone as they hug one another, and then we see the scene between Blake and Yang, which, I'm not gonna lie, I thought Yang was about to kiss Blake in this moment, but they still have a very close interaction that really makes me think Bumblebee is going to be canonized by the end of the volume. This was very close, and definitely seems to be building up to that, and I'm really hoping that it does this volume. It's been building for such a long time, and I know myself and many fans have been waiting for it. Ren then asks about Nora, and as Weiss goes over to tell him what happened, well, RWBY sees that Emerald is there as well. And just as she's about to draw her weapon, and Oscar says, no, she's fine, she's on our side, notably, Emerald has been given her weapons back at this point, so they trust her to some degree, But they're interrupted by a call from May Marigold, and she is panicked in Mantle. She tells RWBY that the ships that they sent arrived, but they weren't alone, and she's ordering all of the people to evacuate to the mines as explosions are happening behind her. Then her call gets cut off, and an emergency broadcast from Atlas is shown on screen. And the screen turns to show the Schneedust Company freighters being destroyed by the Atlas military. And then it cuts to Ironwood, who's looking very Darth Vader-esque as he's telling everyone, giving an ultimatum. He says that he's done everything he can to protect Atlas, but one person still stands in his way, the defender of Mantle. And he tells Penny and all of her friends that wherever they are, they can either come to Atlas Academy to do their duty, leaving Mantle to fend for itself, meaning to abandon Mantle and go to the vault and open it for Ironwood, or sit there and watch while Ironwood destroys Mantle himself, using the bomb that was initially meant for the whale. Everyone watches as Ironwood gives this ultimatum. Presumably, everyone in Atlas and in Mantle, as well as Ironwood's military, so I'm curious to see how much loyalty he'll have after going to such extremes. I don't think that the bomb would actually be delivered to Mantle in the first place, because Marrow and Elm probably wouldn't go along with that. Same with Winter, though Winter might be imprisoned after this, because Vine seems kind of indifferent, and Harriet might just do it to spite Winter, because she kind of told Ironwood that Winter let Jean, Yang, and Ren go just because she didn't like what Winter was doing. And since Ironwood has this entire thing about loyalty, that it always matters, well, Winter might be imprisoned for her disloyalty in this way. So we'll see how all of that unfolds. Ironwood then tells them that they have 1 hour to respond before he puts his plan into motion, meaning that Crow has 1 hour to get to Ironwood and either kill him or forcibly change his mind in some way, shape, or form, likely through beating him to the ground. But we'll have to wait and leave that for next episode or the episode after, because this episode ends right after that. So, needless to say, a lot is going to happen within the next hour of the RWBY series. There's going to be a lot of confrontations, as everyone now knows where Penny and RWBY's group is going to be headed. Crow is probably going to go after Ironwood, and Cinder, not knowing where RWBY is at the moment, is going to head to the vault anyways, thinking that's where she's going to show up. There's going to be that confrontation. Neo might show up there as well, and then that entire thing will unfold with, well, who ends up getting the Relic of Knowledge afterwards, whether that last question is going to be used, because Neo contacted Cinder, saying if you want the relic back, you know what you owe me, meaning RWBY. And yet, Jin, just in the last episode, said, "Are you sure that no one has any questions for me?" And she was referring to Neo, that Neo still has questions. She's likely not exactly sure what happened during the fall of Beacon, so I still think that question's going to be asked, but it's going to be a lot more of a stressful situation with all of the confrontations that are going to be happening. I'm curious to see, with Emerald being brought along with Penny and RWBY's group, that all of them go to Atlas Academy, presumably Nora as well, unless some stay behind caring for Nora at the Schnee Manor, but whoever goes to Atlas Academy, if Emerald is brought along with them, her loyalty to Cinder is going to be brought into question. Maybe then she will take Oscar's cane and try to fight alongside Cinder. Cinder might throw her aside, and she might finally break that affection she has for Cinder. Or Cinder, maybe realizing with Watts' words that she needs to be smarter about things, might start showing affection towards Emerald to try to get her back on her side. There's a lot of ways that this could unfold, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. Ironwood at this point is pretty much irredeemable. I don't see any way for him to survive to the end of the volume with his recent actions. Either he might snap out of it and sacrifice himself in a final moment, or he's going to meet the wrong end of Harbinger, Crow's blade. So, you know, that's going to happen. There hasn't been that many significant deaths this volume, except maybe Hazel, but I feel like there's going to be a number of them within the last 4 episodes. Because remember, the first half of the volume was the tame half. meaning that there's a lot more to come in only 4 episodes. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. What did you guys think of this episode, Ironwood's drastic actions, and how Emerald might end up joining Team RWBY, or at least Team Juniper, or Alpine, or whatever name that you want to call them. I still like Team Jungle for Jean, Ren, Nora, and Emerald, but we'll see how things play out. There's likely still some confrontations between all of them, some past history they still need to work out, so I'm really looking forward to the next 4 episodes. But we'll see how things go, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys want to see more RWBY content, RWBY theories, and analyses, make sure to subscribe and join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. Tweet me at PhoenixKnight7, and I'll see you guys in the next video.